Sonic Labs. You built exceptional technology, but the world keeps misreading it, misinterpreting it, misunderstanding it, mispricing it, misjudging it, and then blaming you for their own mistaken conclusions, don't they? Your technology is real, the opportunity is real, but your audience's view constantly aligns with what is fake, judging you with confusion, gossip, rumor, slander, hearsay, emotion, and whatever other nonsense hallucinates fastest in their skulls. Despite your valiant and heroic balancing of contract obligations, roadmap navigations, investor relations, unrealistic expectations, your own reputations, competitor hostility, legal liability, market volatility, community illiteracy, black hat conspiracy, continuous, ongoing, and never-ending development, unplanned, spontaneous, and diversified chaos, and last but not least, optics, nobody appreciates what you're doing or understands how much you're managing. But what if they actually did understand and appreciate you, Sonic? What if you could make them? What if there was a way to convince the right people to care about the right things? You see, back in 1981, a smart, talented, and ambitious young man was navigating a similar situation. A visionary. He could see clearly his mission, his technology, his brand, and the future. But he was overlooking how difficult it would be to make the world care about it, understand it correctly, and adopt it into their lives. That blind spot would cost Steve Jobs everything. On August 24th, 1981, Apple ran a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, welcoming IBM to the personal computer industry, which IBM had entered only 12 days earlier. At the time, Steve Jobs thought this was the perfect advertisement and was quite proud of it, basking in his own sheer brilliance. But why? Well, founded in 1976, Apple's first few years had been explosive, with an annual growth rate consistently in the triple digits. Flush from the rush and still reeling from the feeling of Apple's IPO just 9 months earlier, at this phase of his life, Steve Jobs had never felt more invincible. And now, seeing an industry giant like IBM follow his example, this gave Steve Jobs a surge to an even higher level of confidence during a time when he felt like he was already on his own personal rocket ship just beginning to take off. But alas, pride goeth before destruction, and the spirit is exalted before a fall. In 1980 and 1981, Apple's explosive growth had made Steve Jobs extremely confident, but unfortunately blind to the understanding of how and why audience behavior changes at scale, and what to do about it. In 1982 and 1983, Apple's growth began to slow as its competitors surged ahead of it, and its market share began plummeting rapidly. Steve Jobs continued to overlook and misunderstand the causes of their audience-related problems. In 1984 and 1985, new Apple products failed and expectations began to miss, resulting in Apple's first quarterly loss, massive layoffs, and its own visionary founder, Steve Jobs, getting kicked out of the very company he started. Which begs the question, so where exactly was Steve Jobs' blind spot? In his famous and award-winning book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, legendary business author Marshall Goldsmith writes about a certain concept, a psychological trap for entrepreneurs he calls the success delusion. I behave this way, I am successful, therefore I am successful because I behave this way. But what most high achievers do not understand is that the same traits that help their past success can become the biggest obstacles to their future achievement. The explosive success of Apple's early years had been enough to show Steve Jobs that he was right and he was doing everything right too. So when Apple's products began failing and its sales began declining, it wasn't because he was wrong, it was because everyone else was. Right? While the success delusion did trap Steve Jobs, it isn't exactly the blind spot that marked his ruin. Rather, it is the reason he remained unaware of his blind spot for so long. He was oblivious to the fact he even had any. Now, for us to find Steve Jobs' blind spot, let's rewind a bit and look back at the beginning. We'll need to look through a window that can show us the very thoughts inside Steve Jobs' head. Now, can Steve Jobs' downfall really be traced back to this ad? Was a visionary genius's blind spot hiding in this ad copy in plain sight the whole time? Let's take a closer look at some of the words he chose to publish. If only they understood its benefits. Well, we can certainly feel his frustration with his audience. The massive effort to distribute. And from there, we can feel a bit of his exhaustion, can't we? Because what we are doing is increasing social capital by enhancing individual productivity. That one, right there. Steve Jobs was a smart guy, and as a smart guy, he knew about a concept called social capital. So what was our visionary's blind spot? Steve Jobs did not know how to build social capital. He did not know how to signal social capital. He did not know how to spread social capital. If social capital isn't built, the audience can't see it or believe it. If social capital isn't signaled, the audience can't relay it or amplify it. If social capital isn't spread, the audience can't trust it or invest in its growth. We can define social capital as the accumulation of trust, shared norms, and reciprocal relationships embedded in a person's or group's social systems and networks, functioning as a resource that can be drawn upon to access opportunities, enable cooperation, and generate benefits that neither money nor individual skill alone can provide. You can probably see why social capital is a very common blind spot. It's hard to measure, but easy to recognize. It's hard to see, but easy to feel. It's hard to discuss, but easy to communicate. Well, you're probably wondering, what happened to Steve Jobs? Well, after leaving Apple in 1985, Steve Jobs bought equity in a Lucasfilm spin-off corporation called Pixar, becoming its largest shareholder. In 1986, he attended a film premiere, which was intended to showcase Pixar's high-tech 3D animation capabilities. Obsessing over audience behaviors, he chose to sit in the back so he could observe the people. When the film ended and he watched it receive a standing ovation, he was struck with an epiphany. What Steve Jobs realized is that you do not increase social capital by communicating your technology superiority. You communicate your technology superiority by increasing social capital. Steve Jobs would rejoin a nearly bankrupt Apple in 1997, becoming its CEO once again. Now equipped with the experience and understanding of social capital and its importance, along with how to build, signal, and spread it, he was able to implement that knowledge as strategy. He did succeed at steering Apple away from financial collapse, helping regain its profitability as soon as 1998. So you might be wondering, why did I share that story? Well, I shared that story so I could give Sonic Labs an important warning. But I'm going to make sure that whoever receives my warning can fully understand my warning. So before we shift focus to my warning and why it's important, please allow me to emphasize social capital and why it's important. Social capital signaling was the entire reason there was a meme coin season. Developers would deploy swarms of swap bots to imply that not only had a new coin been launched, but it was already surging in volume and popularity among a large group. These false signs of pre-established social trust would then attract hordes of the superficial and gullible, who saw it as a genuine indication of risk reduction. However, these signals of social capital can only be faked for so long, before the general Web3 audience becomes immune to them. Fool me twice, shame on me. But that does not mean that audiences begin rejecting social capital signaling outright. Instead, due to the concave saturation of the scam density curve in Web3 fads, they end up increasing their instinctive caution towards social capital signals and begin to analyze them differently. Most humans in Web3 do not know how to analyze any other way. The easiest and most evergreen way to pass their adaptive filter checks is by building, signaling, and spreading authentic social capital. Well, are we sure social capital is important? One of the most cited books in recent decades has been Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations, which itself has a bibliography of about 58 pages. Dedicating his entire life to a relentless study of which innovations get adopted and which ones do not, Rogers concludes that for a technology's adoption to happen, diffusion must happen. What is diffusion? Well, diffusion is a special type of communication in which the messages are about a new idea. Specifically, diffusion is the process in which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among members of its social system. So why are we sure that social capital is important? Well, for any innovation to be adopted, diffusion must happen. For diffusion to happen, social systems must be used. For social systems to be used, social capital must exist. For social capital to exist, it must be built, signaled, and spread. In the Diffusion of Innovations book, there are over 508 case studies, among which there are 0 exceptions to this. Without social capital, innovations do not get adopted. Social capital is derived from interpersonal and hierarchical relationships, social groups and shared identity, trust, cooperation and reciprocity, as well as culture and customs. Not all variables are weighted equally. Culture is the biggest factor influencing the building, signaling, and spreading of social capital. How are social capital and culture different? Well, social capital comes from economics and sociology, whereas culture comes from anthropology. A culture is something people learn from their lived sensory experience as human beings. Social capital refers to benefits received by ties between people who understand and participate in a culture. You can think of culture as the shell or wrapper around social capital. Culture is like the visible outside, and social capital is what's hidden within it. Now let's define culture in the best way applicable to Web3. So what is culture? According to legendary anthropologist Clifford Geertz, culture is a transmitted pattern of meanings embodied in symbols, a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms, through which human beings communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge and attitudes about life and its experience. So what's a symbol? Clifford Geertz defined a symbol as any object, act, event, quality, or relationship that serves as a vehicle for a conception. A symbol's meaning is the concept it represents. So there is some good news, Sonic Labs. Due to you focusing on all of that, you're now familiar with diffusion's definition, elements, and relationship to innovation adoption, social systems, their importance and relationship to diffusion, social capital's definition, importance, and relationship to social systems, culture's definition and relationship to social capital, the term symbol, its definition, and its relationship to culture. For you to truly grasp the severity of my warning, all of this was extremely necessary. But the good news is, just from you learning this stuff so far, your situation is becoming exponentially less dangerous. Now, we will get to my urgent warning very soon, but right now it is time for the next story. This story is also very important. In fact, you might be in this story. Ready? This is the story of your audience's technical literacy. At first, your audience was small, comprised of only the most highly literate pioneers, giving your audience a uniform composition of the highest literacy. As the highly literate pioneers accumulated over time, this attracted the semi-literate followers, who followed the highly literate's lead and interpreted the accumulation of highly literate pioneers as a sign of real social capital, which helped reduce their perceived risk of being only semi-literate themselves. This degraded your audience's uniformity slightly, but it still remained highly literate overall. As your semi-literate audience continued to grow, it increased total audience size at an exponent, which signaled enough social capital to completely eliminate any perception of risk by illiterate laggards, who became motivated enough by FOMO to stampede into reckless amounts of exposure, driven entirely by symbolic interpretations of what appeared instinctively to them as a golden but time-limited opportunity, with the biggest risk involved being missing out on it. This resulted in chaos, rage, grief, and unmanaged expectations. At that point, your audience had become majority illiterate. You see, once your audience becomes majority illiterate, they will not magically become more literate by themselves. But the truth is, Sonic Labs, the truth is that your audience is actually not majority illiterate. Because no matter what their technical literacy is, they will always be highly symbolically literate of cultural concepts and signals of social capital. We are talking about every single person in your audience, both the bright ones and the dim ones. They are all geniuses when it comes to symbolic literacy. Which brings us to the question, is the biggest danger facing Sonic Labs today their audience's literacy? So what is the most dangerous literacy problem for Sonic? Is your biggest danger your audience's lack of technical literacy? Keep in mind, everyone lacks technical literacy somewhere. For a totally hypothetical scenario, in your opinion, which of these literacy gaps is more threatening? Would it be more dangerous if they were not technically literate of how you work, or if you were not technically literate of how they work? Sonic Labs, to be as clear and transparent as possible, I did not ask you this to insult you or your work. I asked you that because you and your work deserve to be appreciated. You are leaders because of the work you do. But leadership often requires us to take initiative and make the first move. To lead our audience in understanding how we work, we must first lead ourselves in understanding how they work. Wait a minute. First of all, who the heck do you think you are, Five? And what do you mean by how they work? You must be new to Web3, Five, because most people here aren't even capable of doing anything that remotely resembles actual work. Why should we listen to some weirdo like you? Actually, you're right. Why would you guys believe that I am somebody who knows what they're talking about? Maybe I am an absolute newbie to Web3. You guys probably get presentations like this all the time by people who got here less than a week ago. I completely understand. So how can I prove that I might know what I'm talking about? Let's put my level of understanding to the test first. Allow me to name some of the actual elephants in the room. To name only 3 elephants, developers are everywhere, but dApp makers are nowhere. All EVM chains need an economic moat for their value, and the arbitrage loops from burning FTM for S end up hindering the price climb of S. Don't worry about these, Five. We have a plan for all 3 of these, Five. Besides, Five, merely naming these 3 things does not make you an expert. That is a good point. So here's what we'll do. My goal here is to make friends, so I want to do the friendly thing and demonstrate a deeper level of literacy on things closer to what your current strategic focus is. And if you find my literacy adequate, all I would ask is that you please consider that my literacy might extend to other areas. So let's find out how huge the gaps in my literacy are by addressing the 3 elephants in the room. Let's just quickly dissect these 3 elephants, shall we? Well, the first elephant is that developers are everywhere, but dApp makers are nowhere. Because knowing how to build is not the same thing as knowing what to build, is it? You probably feel like you've been sweating through your shirt on stage, repeatedly shouting for developers, but it doesn't seem to be working as well for you as it did for Steve Ballmer. Why? Well, in 2014, Vitalik Buterin actually spelled out decentralized applications in the Ethereum white paper and even gave several examples. But people in Web3 are too brain-rotted to focus for longer than 5 or 10 minutes, and they have no reading comprehension at all. Architects need engineers, and engineers need architects, but they are not the same creature. The most skilled bricklayers do not necessarily know how to build Malbork Castle or St. Pancras Station. A huge fraction of the people calling themselves dApp makers have zero original thinking or ideas. Now, the vertical integration initiative for Sonic. That is actually meant to help navigate this issue. I'm pretty sure. Yes? No? Any gaps? Let's look for other areas where I might be illiterate. The second elephant is that all EVM chains need an economic moat to defend their value. Because your moat is not made by your scale is made by your moat. For an EVM blockchain, the benefit of onboarding ease tends to come with the cost of offboarding ease, doesn't it? Just checking for gaps again, this is another thing that vertical integration could help solve, couldn't it? Yes? No? It is quite clear that Sonic Labs is highly aware that an EVM blockchain needs to be a dApp ecosystem. And that is actually quite bullish, because there are plenty of teams out there running their own blockchain that seem completely oblivious to this point. If the technological superiority of Sonic does not cause it to outgrow its commodified perception, Sonic Labs can take it upon themselves through vertical integration to design and deploy uniquely valuable dApps. These create new scenarios for gas usage of S, as well as other net positive economic results, metrics, and moats. But there could still be gaps in my literacy. The third elephant, arbitrage loops from burning FTM for S tend to hinder the price climb of S. What causes the market cap of S to bloom is the same thing that causes its price chart to wilt. Since both FTM and S touch the US dollar, their US dollar prices end up getting sewn together. Now, you designed this, so I know you already know this, but your audience is not very technically literate about this, are they? Sonic Labs' current plan involves permanently disabling this burn to mint bridge a few weeks from now. Why? Probably leaders have determined it's time to give the people what they want, or it's time to stop giving the people what they want. If I was guessing, a big factor for that schedule was steering from institutional investors or venture capital partners. You see, technical literacy tends to step downwards with each conversational relay along the accountability for results network. My mentor once said, if Mr. Constraint spends enough nights with Miss Conviction, then eventually baby compromise will be born. Now, why did we dissect these three elephants? Well, please consider, Sonic, even if I had some gaps, were you overall satisfied with my level of literacy, considering that I am an outsider? How would you rank me compared to the rest of your audience? How would you rank me against your own internal teammates, Sonic? The only reason I ask this is because if you could suppose provisionally that my level of literacy is close enough to the mark, could you also speculate, hypothetically, that I might also know what I'm talking about in other areas? Possibly. Sure, but who cares? We already have a plan for all three of those five. One area where we can definitely agree is that it's clear Sonic Labs does have a plan. But there is also an area where we might also disagree, and that area is the reason I made this presentation, which is to give you an urgent warning. Your current plan will destroy more social capital for Sonic than the collapse of Multichain in 2022 did for Phantom. Now you might be asking, why and how are you so sure of this, Five? Well, to explain my certainty behind that warning to you, we should briefly cover three important curves. Those three important curves are the sigmoid curve, the Veen curve, and of course, the learning curve. Now, first is the sigmoid curve. Now, your audience definitely does not know the name of this curve, but they are all extremely familiar with it, symbolically, culturally. Why? Because this curve is a pattern of conceptual meaning. The price chart history of exponential growth very often shows this curve. It is a cultural event symbol that signals a successful investment. This curve on a price chart is a symbol that your audience dreams about. It is their fast financial fantasy of favorable front running fulfilled. Finally. Now, unfortunately, this is the unlikeliest and rarest curve to show up on a Web3 price chart. Which brings us to the Veen curve. Now, your audience will not know the name of this curve either. And yet they are all too familiar with this curve. Everyone in Web3 knows this curve. Not only is this curve a known pattern, its occurrence is a known pattern too. This curve is the price action of meme coins as well as other fad slop and scam trash. It is a cultural event that symbolizes weakness, fraud, loss, and death. A price chart with this curve symbolizes that which your audience hates. Their cognitive biases insist that this curve represents villainy and evil. And as they see this curve more often, they come to expect this curve more often. Now, why do they come to expect it? Because they begin doing something called learning. Repeated pattern exposure teaches pattern recognition, becoming pattern expectation. And on a Web3 price chart, your audience's pattern expectation will become a pattern manifestation. If your audience feels Veen curve sentiment, they will furnish Veen curve proof that the way they were feeling was correct. Paraphrasing from earlier, cultures are patterns of symbols that represent human knowledge and attitudes. Culture is learned. Culture is a major factor in social capital, which is required for the adoption of innovations. To put it simplistically, good patterns cause good culture, cause good social capital, cause good social systems, cause good diffusion and adoption. In contrast, bad patterns cause bad culture, cause bad social capital, cause bad social systems, cause bad diffusion and adoption. Good patterns and good cultures are often faked in Web3. Those that learn of the bad hiding behind the good will feel betrayed. Consider, if you will, that humans learn from many different types of patterns, not just the ones on price charts. Let's now focus on that last part for a moment. Do you remember what diffusion is and its relationship to adoption? It is definitely one of the most important terms to learn in this presentation. Why is it important? Because diffusion is a type of communication. Humans learn to communicate from learning symbols and learning patterns. Think about it. Cryptography only works because communication follows patterns. Both your official communications and your audience's communications get analyzed for patterns. But what does that mean for Sonic Labs? It means this is a feedback loop. Your patterns transmit your culture signals your social capital enables your social systems drive your diffusion and adoption amplify your communications overwrite your patterns. Now, regardless of whether they are inside or outside your user base, an audience of human beings will perceive, understand, and judge the quality of Sonic's innovation based on both first order and second order effects of each of these components, meaning both your influence on these as well as your audience's influence on these. Your audience, by the way, is not technically literate of any of this stuff either. They will absolutely not know the names of these concepts, relationships, or mechanisms. But they will vibe sense the patterns and respond accordingly. Please keep in mind, this is a compounding feedback loop. So whenever it's good, it becomes extra good. And whenever it's bad, it becomes extra bad. But wait a minute, Five. Weren't you supposed to explain why you were so sure about your warning about our plan? Yes, and I am about to right now, I promise. We will do the fastest and most rapid 3-slide review, and then we will be at the most critical part of this entire presentation. Our first review will be the warning itself. Your current plan will destroy more social capital for Sonic than the collapse of Multichain in 2022 destroyed for Phantom. Our next review is the literacy conundrum. Sonic's internal team is technically literate, but Sonic's external audience is symbolically literate. However, Sonic's internal team might not be technically literate concerning their audience's extremely high level of symbolic literacy. Which brings us to culture. Cultures are transmitted patterns of symbols representing the knowledge and attitudes of humans. Cultures are learned, preserved, taught, enforced, disseminated, modified, corrected, upgraded, and passed down generationally as heritages. Therefore, the symbolic literacy of your audience descends from a pattern learning heritage that can trace its roots back to the most ancient and primitive cultures in all of human history. Now let's get back to your plan. And now it's time for something very important. Time for a very important test. On the next slide, I am going to describe your plan. However, I am going to describe it using absolutely zero technical language. Instead, I will describe it entirely as an allegory, using primitive metaphor and ancient symbolism. This is the test. If you understand what I am referring to on the next slide, then you are symbolically literate. And if you acknowledge this symbolic literacy in yourself, then congratulations. You have taken the first step towards understanding your audience, as well as solving all of the audience problems, Sonic Labs. Now, should that happen, and you recognize your own symbolic literacy from this test, then you should also conclude that this likely means that my warning is correct. If you do not understand what is on the next slide, then it is possible that this entire presentation has been in vain. I mean this in all seriousness. The stakes have never been higher. The results of this test will change the future. The timeline of Web3 will be permanently altered, and it all hinges on the next slide. Sonic Labs. On a scheduled date in the near future, you, the trusted chieftain of the tribe, are planning to publicly murder your firstborn child, as if fulfilling some demonic pact, while the entire village is forced to watch you do it, nauseated with fear as you thoughtlessly destroy and callously discard the most historic symbol that represents in their mind and in their heart the beginning of their entire journey and their whole relationship with you. Remember, events are symbols. Act Facts are symbols. Objects are symbols. Relationships are symbols. A symbol's meaning is the concept it represents. Well, how did you do? How do you feel? Believe it or not, if you do feel a bit bad right now, that is actually quite bullish, because that means we can work together to fix all of this and save not only ourselves, but the audience too, and feasibly even all of Web3. Okay, but how can we work together, Five? And also, why would we want to? Well, those are great questions, Sonic Labs. For me to list everything I could help with, this presentation would take an entire day. So I will just provide you a listed brief summary going over some of the ways I can help. I can explain why most DApp makers are bad at their jobs. I can explain how to recruit good DApp makers inexpensively. I can explain why DApp makers might distrust your current plans. I can explain how you, Sonic Labs, could communicate your plans much better. I can explain how to use your audience's symbolic literacy for your benefit as well as theirs. I can explain how to build, signal, and spread social capital in ways customized to Sonic Labs. I can explain why you should appoint an official CEO ASAP. I can explain who I think your next CEO should be as well. I can explain a lot of the other gigantic things that most EVM chains are overlooking. And I can explain even more things that would just not fit on this slide. But the most important way that I can help, I can protect you from the social capital disaster caused by you butchering the Phantom Opera, which would symbolize to your pattern expecting audience that you're probably planning to do the same thing to Sonic in the near future as well. Are you still not convinced? How about a few hypothetical scenarios? For a totally hypothetical scenario, let's say you were to say to me, "But Five, you don't understand how brilliant we are. After we slaughter the Phantom Opera, we are going to yeet a truckload of cash at our own price chart. And since the FTM to S bridge thing will be shut off, this will cause the chart of S to moon. And then everyone will feel happy and pleased and won't feel betrayed." Let's pretend this is part of your plan, just a totally hypothetical scenario. First, I would ask you to review the 3 curves part of this presentation. Even if this is your plan right now, this doesn't actually explain the decision to kill the Phantom Opera. Disabling the bridge thing by itself is enough for a stunt like this. I should also mention that your audience has been absolutely inundated with faking the price chart tactics due to the recent meme coin fad slop season. Please understand, there is an established industry-wide pattern of Veen curves that recur again and again from low trust. But that's okay, Five. We're gonna use a Sybil swarm of bots to make the chart look real. Okay, do you legitimately believe that the false creation of social capital will outweigh the true destruction of social capital? Let's look at another quick hypothetical scenario. For this one, we asked an objective, unbiased, and disinterested large language model an allegorical question. Let's say someone had a wife, and they were about to tell their wife, "Hey, do you remember the places where I first asked you out, and we had our first date, and where I proposed to you, and where our wedding was? I am going to destroy all of those locations." How would you expect the wife to react? Would you say the marriage's quality should increase, decrease, or stay the same? Our artificially intelligent friend then replies, "Ha, I think the answer is pretty obvious here. The wife would almost certainly be upset, and the marriage quality would very likely decrease." Those locations carry enormous sentimental weight. They're not just physical locations, they're anchors for shared memories and the story of the relationship. Hearing that they'll be destroyed will feel like an attack on the relationship's history itself, even if the husband has some practical reason for it. But hey, AI can make mistakes, right? And it's not like audience behavior is driven entirely by emotional sentiment, right? Yet another hypothetical scenario. Let's say you are interested in recruiting more DApp makers for Sonic, so you don't have to rely solely on Andre Cronje doing vertical integration. Just hypothetically, you might be interested in this. So those DApp makers are probably going to do some research prior to committing their time and resources towards building their DApp on your chain. Now, what do you think those DApp makers might uncover in their research? Oh, wow, these guys killed their old chain. Why did they do that? Are they going to kill this one too? Actually, let's look at some other chains. Are you guys truly sure that dApps getting gas royalties is enough to offset this event's perception? Because once that feature becomes popular enough, other EVM chains will copy it immediately and then brag about it as loud as they can. Then your advantage will be diluted immediately, but your weird history will continue to be forever symbolically judged. Just the last few hypothetical scenarios. Let's say you were to say to me, but Five, our technology is so good that we don't need social capital. I would encourage you to learn why Reddit's user base came from an exodus out of a rival website called Dig. Additionally, you should perhaps research why spikes of Linux OS downloads correlate with Microsoft sunsetting versions of Windows. Also, hypothetically, you could say, but Five, even if social capital matters, it's impossible for us to influence it. I would very humbly suggest a study of how Lego rebuilt social capital to save themselves from bankruptcy back in 2003. Additionally, you could research how the Salesforce Trailblazers program helped make Salesforce an industry giant. Hypothetically, you might also say, but Five, even with social capital, our weird audience situation is just too unique. Well, I don't know if you know this, but Wikipedia's army of volunteer editors are probably the weirdest people on the planet, yet somehow they align very well with social capital and social systems. And also, perhaps you've heard of a very rare and esoteric website called GitHub. It's actually only a coding repository, but it somehow tricked millions of anonymous software developers to build, signal, and spread social capital on the platform's behalf while being entirely motivated by their own human self-interests. Look, can I just say something, Sonic Labs? Can I just say something? The fact you would boldly execute on something as ambitious as vertical integration speaks volumes about your vision, your tenacity, your alignment with good principles, your work ethic, and your commitment to excellence. Most people in Web3 come here expecting a picnic. When they discover it's not a picnic, they fold like napkins. The only reason that I know the things in this presentation is because multiple years ago, when I was building the same dApp that I'm working on now, I failed at understanding my audience's perspectives, behaviors, and literacy. This setback costed me years, and I am still paying for my mistakes to this very day. Confronted by the truth of my shortcomings, I looked elsewhere in Web3 for the solutions to my problems. And every time that I tried to correct myself to the rest of Web3, it only made all of my problems worse. It wasn't until I started doing research outside of Web3 that I finally found the pieces that I had been missing. And do you want to know why it was so hard to find the right answers within Web3? Well, it's because 99% of the people in Web3 fall into one of three categories: the immoral, the incompetent, or the insane. So when you're looking elsewhere in Web3 for the solutions to your problems, there's a 99% chance that these are the classmates that you're copying your homework from. Wait a minute, are you implying that you're part of the 1%, Five? Look, I'll admit, it would be a big ask for me to suggest to you that I should be viewed as one of the rare and elite 1% that don't fall into one of those three categories. In which case, I would humbly ask you to group me with the insane. Because clearly, I am absolutely insane enough to spend my time building the most elaborate slideshow presentation in my entire life in an effort to summarize the contents of dozens of books, all in an attempt to reach the leaders of an organization with whom I have never actually communicated directly with before. And why would I, a silent member of your audience, come forward like this? Because you would have to be insane to look out across the ocean called Web3, seeing very little aside from fad slop and scam trash, and understand and realize that this technology is a vehicle for financial revolution. Yet I still do. And it would be insane for a man to repeatedly witness his fellow human beings using a technology as a tool to reveal the savage villainy inside their own hearts, and still in his own heart believe and insist that same technology can be used to build civilization and teach virtue. Yet, I am that man. So by all means, count me among the insane. Because I am truly insane enough to believe that I can reach Sonic Labs with this message. And while having no idea of who is actually in charge of that organization, I am insane enough to try and convince its leaders to abort their current plan and quite possibly allow me to suggest a different one. Now, what's different about my plan? Well, the current plan will permanently paint Sonic Labs as destructive monsters, due to them being the direct cause for the event, and what it symbolizes for the human audience. That is way worse than with multi-chain. In contrast, my plan will not permanently reduce the trust that Sonic Labs has from their audience, nor disintegrate the relationship between them. In fact, my plan can actually increase and improve both of these factors. Now, the current plan will demonstrate that the 2025 messaging from Sonic Labs concerning the continuity of Phantom were all actually lies, which will become data points to your audience for their pattern analysis of your ethics and integrity. My plan will create bullish symbols that can grow into a bullish pattern, because your audience would prefer to see Phantom Opera preserved in a museum, not thoughtlessly thrown into a pile of garbage. And they will react positively to this. But something needs to happen right now for me to be able to implement my plan and protect Sonic's social capital and audience trust. This presentation is being emailed to over 100 inboxes. Why? Because the people in charge of Sonic Labs need to see this. However, it is nearly impossible for an outsider to currently identify who the people in charge actually are. Sonic Labs' recent messaging has insinuated, in the absence of a CEO, the board will oversee operations. Now, what this could imply is that venture capital has taken over Sonic Labs. It might not imply that, though. Regardless, I will address all possible recipients of this presentation right now. Whoever you are, if you have grasped the importance of what we have covered in this presentation, the entire future of Web3 is now counting on you to make sure that the people in charge of Sonic Labs, whoever they are, also receive and view this presentation and the urgent warning contained within it. It's possible that you might also not know who is currently in charge of Sonic Labs. In which case, I will point you towards the controllers of these 4 addresses. These 4 addresses control the SFC contract. Whoever controls these 4 addresses likely is in charge of Sonic Labs. You need to forward the email you received with this presentation to those people right now. If you don't know who they are, you need to forward this email to someone at Sonic Labs who might actually know. There is not much time left. I need to be in direct communication with whoever is in charge of Sonic Labs as soon as possible. This is my email address. We need email correspondence happening between us immediately. They need to email me right now. Are you one of the people in charge? You need to email me right now. There is even more that I have to tell you, but due to the sensitive nature of the information, I have had to withhold that from this presentation. If this message does not reach the people in charge of Sonic Labs, the current plan will block, forfeit, squander, and lose several billions of dollars worth of future upside for the market cap of S. Once a blockchain does something symbolically untrustworthy in the public eye, there is virtually no chance for rescue of it. It does not matter how good your technology is. Many blockchains are built superior to Bitcoin. Yet, those blockchains fail at building, signaling, and spreading social capital like Satoshi did. When multi-chain collapsed, you had the opportunity to blame an external actor, the Chinese government. When the Phantom Opera gets murdered, the heartless, vicious, and evil killer will be an internal actor. You. A villain is the cornerstone of a compelling narrative. That's a quote by author Andrew J. Stillman. Villains are the most important characters of any story. They sustain the story to its final conclusion. A quote by author Mark Maiden. Think about how many Web3 organizations fail to predict their audience's reaction to something that the decision makers did not view as important. Market caps have plunged 8, 9, and 10 figures over some front-end glitch preventing the claim of an airdrop or a last-minute delay to some performative event. How often do you see projects bouncing back from this? In my opinion, rarely. In fact, the opposite of bouncing back is what you usually see happening. You could even say there's an established pattern of not bouncing back. And the reason you could say that is because there is a pattern. And your audience is instinctively quite familiar with this pattern as well. But that doesn't need to happen to you, Sonic. We can break out of that pattern. We can work as a team. We can implement a plan with the right literacy, not copy homework from our Web3 classmates. Anything you want for Sonic can still be achieved. A 10-figure TVL, an 11-figure market cap, 12 different on-ramps, 13 chain unique dApps, 14 cover features on Forbes magazine. Warren Buffett was there over 20 times. But it's going to take using a different playbook than the other blockchains groping around in the dark for an understanding of their own business model. It can be so easy for Sonic to win. There's only one thing you need to do, but you need to do it right now. You need to get this presentation watched by whoever is in charge of Sonic Labs. Or if you are watching this presentation right now and you are a decision maker for Sonic Labs, please email me immediately. Contact me right now.